Air Transat Flight 236 was flying from Toronto to Lisbon. It was the middle of the night and the aircraft was cruising at an altitude of 39,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean. Pilots face these situations every day, and there was nothing abnormal about it. But there was one thing on the plane that would change the entire situation in just a few moments. Let us tell you here that the land is not visible even far from the altitude of 3,900 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. There, the captain suddenly came to know that the fuel of the ship is now going to end. It was a very frightening situation for both the pilots, because the fuel over the Atlantic Ocean means only one thing, and that is death. On August 23, 2001, an Airbus A330 of the Air Transit airline at Toronto Pearson Airport was preparing for a 7-hour non-stop flight, and hence 48 metric tons of fuel was added to it, and after preparation, boarding was started. At this time, it was 9 p.m. local time. 13 crew members, including 293 passengers and 2 pilots, boarded Flight 236. Flight captain was 48 years old Robert Pesci, who had 16,000 hours of flying experience. The first officer was 28 years old Dirk Deeger, and he also had 5 hours of experience, out of which 400 hours he flew the same plane. Overall, it was neither a lack of experience of the pilots nor any fault of any kind in the plane. After completing all the flight checks, the pilots took Flight 236 to the runway, and with the permission of ATC, they took the ship off. After takeoff, the pilot turned the ship to Lisbon across the Atlantic Ocean. In a few minutes, the ship reached its cruising altitude of 3,900 feet. Usually, pilots do not have much work on such long flights because most of the work is done by the autopilot system. Pilots only monitor the situation and keep the control tower aware of their location and updates. Flight 236 4 hours had passed since the takeoff. So far, everything was going normal, and most of the people in the passenger cabin were sleeping due to nightfall. The ship had reached the right center of the Atlantic Ocean, and this was the moment when there was an issue in the ship. According to Canadian time, at 1 o'clock in the night, the pilot in the engine number 2 of the ship, that is, the right engine of the ship, an abnormal reading noticed. The oil pressure in the engine was showing high, the quantity of oil was low, and the oil temperature was also being low. This kind of error was noticed by the pilots. For the first time in their career, they opened the foreign flight manual and tried to know about this strange error. Normally, when the ship is operational, the oil temperature increases over time, but here it was indicating low temperature, which was not normal in any way. Could not get any information about this error in the flight manual. The pilots contacted Air Transit's maintenance unit in Canada and informed them about the error. Unfortunately, the maintenance unit was also not aware of this error. They asked the pilot to keep monitoring the error. They would contact them again shortly after. Although faulty oil readings were showing in the aircraft's right engine, there were no issues of any kind during the flight. The pilots relaxed, thinking that perhaps a faulty sensor was giving incorrect oil readings, but after half an hour, another advisory message was displayed to the captain. This message was not related to oil but to fuel. In commercial airlines, fuel is only distributed in the wings, and it was noticed that both wings of Flight 236 did not have an equal amount of fuel. The quantity of fuel in the right wing was less compared to the left. Now, normally this issue is not so serious because it can be fixed during the flight. The captain opened the crossfeed valve to resolve the issue, which allowed fuel to start flowing from the left wing to the right wing. Within minutes, the quantity of fuel in both wings was equal. It had only been 10 minutes since the captain started seeing the low fuel warning, a situation that no pilot wants to face, especially in a plane full of passengers. The pilot noticed that the fuel in the right wing had decreased again, and now there wasn't enough fuel to reach Lisbon even after combining both wings. At this point, the situation had become serious. There weren't many options to divert the plane in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, They had only one option, and that was the Azores Islands. These islands are part of the Portuguese territory in the Atlantic Ocean, where an airport is located on the island of Terceira. The captain first contacted Santa Maria ATC and informed them that he was going to land at this airport due to the fuel shortage. But even now, the pilot wasn't sure if they'd make it to the airport or have to ditch in the ocean. At this point, there was only 7 tons of fuel left in the plane, about 700 kilograms. While that might sound like a lot, it was actually just 6% of the A330's fuel capacity, and it was dropping fast. The question is, why was the fuel level so low? Was a faulty sensor giving incorrect readings again? Or was there really a fuel shortage? Fuel depletion is only possible if there's a leak somewhere. To investigate, the captain instructed the flight crew to check the wing's trailing edge for any signs of leakage. However, due to the darkness, the crew couldn't spot anything unusual. The situation was dire. They were losing 1 ton of fuel every 5 minutes. It became clear to the captain that fuel was definitely leaking from somewhere. They only had about 25 minutes of fuel left, which wasn't enough to reach Terceira Airport. During this time, the captain and first officer were in constant contact with the maintenance unit and ATC. The maintenance unit instructed the captain to descend the aircraft from 3,900 to 2,000 feet to confirm the fuel leak. But the captain refused to do so because the pilot believed that even if the fuel leak was confirmed, it would not be possible to bring the aircraft back up. At least they still had the option of gliding at 3,900 feet. All doubts were removed in the next few minutes when the right engine of the aircraft caught fire. Seeing this, chaos erupted in the aircraft, and the passengers, who were still sleeping peacefully, had their slumber shattered by clouds of fear. The aircraft now had only 4.5 tons of fuel and a single engine remaining. It was not possible to control the aircraft with this one engine, so the altitude started decreasing gradually. Meanwhile, an emergency was declared at Terceira Airport. Fire trucks and emergency crews began their preparations to deal with all kinds of situations. The plane, which was still 240 kilometers away from Terceira Airport, now had only 600 kilograms of fuel left. Then, what I had feared would happen, happened. The left engine of the plane caught fire due to running at full thrust, and now Flight 236 began gliding over the Atlantic Ocean without an engine. Here, the captain's decision not to descend the plane to 2,000 feet proved to be absolutely correct. With both engines shut down, the inside of the plane was now dark, because the engines also powered the plane's electrical system. Fortunately, the plane's ram air turbine deployed, which generates just enough electricity from the airspeed to operate the cockpit's critical equipment. Now, Terceira Airport was 120 kilometers away. The ship had come down to 3,000 feet, and the captain had to cross this distance only by gliding. The darkness in the passenger cabin and the pin-drop silence had kept a time of fear. Such a silence which was probably indicating a disaster. The worst case was that if the ship could not reach the airport, then it would have to land in the ocean itself. For this reason, the crew started preparing the passengers by referring to the landing in the water. Landing in the ocean is dangerous in every way because if the passenger escapes the impact, he can drown in water, and if he does not drown in water, he can die of hypothermia due to cold water. The aircraft was dependent on the pitch control, which the pilots were manually controlling with the stick. The altitude of the ship was dropping to 2,000 feet per minute. That is, in the next 15 minutes, either the ship will reach the airport or in the ocean. When the distance of the plane was 15 kilometers from Terceira Airport, its altitude was 1,300 feet, and normally the altitude has to be kept at 3,000 feet at such a distance. Now if the pilot reduced his altitude by doing a nosedive, then the speed of the plane would be very fast, and in this situation the chances of crash landing are very high. So the pilot made the plane make a 360 round there. When this round was completed, the distance from the airport was the same when the altitude had dropped to 5,000 feet. This altitude was still high, but not so much that another 360 could be installed, so the pilot positioned the ship in the line of the runway and made it do a few S-turns. Due to the sturdiness, the distance of the ship from the runway increased. and he got the time to reduce the altitude. The thrust is increased, which causes the nose of the plane to rise, but Flight 236 did not have engine thrust, so this landing was very different from normal landing and also very dangerous. The pilot had only one chance to land the plane, either R or cross. Finally, the plane hit the runway with a loud jerk and 8 out of 12 tires burst. There was a little difficulty in stopping the plane, but finally he stopped skidding. As soon as the plane came to a stop, a fire broke out in its landing gear, which was quickly brought under control by the airport crew. Flight 236 made aviation history as the first and last passenger plane to set a record for gliding without engines for the longest time. When an investigation was conducted regarding fuel leakage in the right engine, it was discovered that the maintenance crew had replaced an engine part before takeoff in Toronto. However, the part was from a different plane, and due to a loose fitting, it caused vibrations which ruptured a nearby fuel line. Following this incident, Airbus installed a new system that would allow pilots to detect fuel leakage during future flights. A year later, Captain Robert Peach and First Officer Dirk de Jager were awarded the Superior Airmanship Award for performing a dead stick landing on the Airbus. I hope you'll like and share. Thank you very much for your loving comment. See you in the next exciting video.